The Return of the Indian by Reid Chapter 10, Boone's Brainwave. Yes, it's us all. I mean, it's us, said Patrick excitedly. He capered about, stiff-legged, unable to contain himself. Omri, too, was over the moon. It's so good to see you, Boone, he cried, wishing he could wring the little man's hand and bang him on the back. Boone, who must have fallen off his horse at some point, now scrambled to his feet and dusted himself off. The horse came up behind him in the cupboard and nudged him forcibly in the back, as if to say, I'm here too. Omri could just about stroke its tiny nose with the tip of his little finger. The horse bunted it, nodding its head up and down, and then exchanged whinnies with Little Bear's pony on the distant seed tray. And it's mighty good to see you, fellas, Boone was saying warmly, as he scrambled out of the cupboard. Been more'n a mite dull without my hallucinations. Well, what do you know? If it ain't a little Indian girl. Bright Stars had taken a few steps toward him timidly. He raised his hat. Howdy, Injun lady. Hey, but where's the other one? That redskin that made me his blood brother after he'd half killed me. He looked around the top of the chest, but Little Bear's matchbox bed had its back to him. Tarnation take me if I didn't miss that doggone varmint when I woke up the last time. Or went back, or whatever you call it. He rubbed his shirt front reminiscently. My old pals thought I'd gone plumb loco when I tried to tell them how I got my wound. Are you okay now, Boone? Me? I'm just fine. You can't kill Boo-Hoo Boone so easy, even if he done look a mite soft. No, where's Little Bear? Let me shake the hand that shot me, to show there ain't no hard feelings. Bright Stars didn't understand much of this, but she heard Little Bear's name. She took Boone by the arm and drew him over to the bed. When Boone saw the prostrate figure of the Indian, he stopped short. Holy smoke, what happened to him? He got shot too, by Frenchmen, Omri added in a low voice, and signaled to Boone not to ask questions, but Boone was not the most tactful of men. Gee, Jehoshaphat! Never did trust them Frenchies. Got one running our saloon. Someday somebody's gonna run him right out of town. Water's the whiskey, you know, he added confidentially to Bright Stars. At the word whiskey, Little Bear opened his eyes. He had dropped off to sleep and tried to sit up. When he saw Boone bending over him, he let out a cry of recognition and then fell back again with a hand on his bandaged chest. Gee, the poor old savage, said Boone, shaking his head. He sniffed. Not that he probably didn't deserve it. They're always up to no good, but all the same, I can't stand to see a man in pain. He wiped away a tear. He's much better now, said Patrick. There's nothing to start crying about. Boone blew his nose loudly and plonked himself down on the bed. Tell me the whole thing, he said. Not now, said Omri hurriedly. Why in thunder not? I gotta hear sometime. Come on, Injun. Or are you ashamed of something you done to that Frenchie to make him take a shot at you? Little Bear lay on the bed and stared up at Boone. There was suddenly tension in the air as they all, Bright Stars too, waited for him to remember to ask. Slowly, he raised himself onto his elbows. His eyes had gone narrow, his face taut and scowling. Suddenly he opened his eyes and let out a wild cry. Aye! Bright Stars put her hands on her face, turned and fled up the ramp into the teepee. What got into her? Boone asked, looking after her, puzzled. But another anguished cry transfixed them all. Little Bear, remember. Soldiers come, burn village, burn corn, many, many. He opened and closed his hands rapidly, holding up 10 fingers. Again and again. Iroquois braves fight, but not enough. Not got guns, horses. Enemy break, burn, steal, kill, kill. His voice cracked. He stopped speaking. Another man might have broken down and wept, but Little Bear just stared, wide-eyed and frozen-faced. His mouth was shut in a straight line, like a knife cut in his hard face. Only his hands quivered at his sides, and his fingers became hooks. Gee whiz, fella, muttered Boone at last. That's too bad. There was a long silence. Nobody moved. Little Bear lay on his back, his eyes open. He seemed to be neither fully awake nor asleep. Omri passed a finger back and forth in front of those staring eyes. They didn't respond. Omri, Patrick, and Boone looked anxiously at each other. "What shall we do?" "Nothing," said Boone. "Poor guy's had a shock. Happened to me once. Came to after I got knocked out in some kind of ruckus. Couldn't remember a thing. Started in talking and drinking, just like ever there was, just like everything was normal, when all of a sudden it come back to me. A lynching. A mob of coyotes just strung up a fella for something he didn't even do. Most horrible thing I ever saw. I just laid there, seeing it all over again. Took me a dang long time to get over it. And that wasn't bad neither, as what he's a-seeing now, poor critter." Tears of sympathy were streaming down the cowboy's leathery cheeks. "Them rotten Frenchies, mixing in, sneaking up on 'em that-a-way, skeering their women folk and all. Gee, I sure would like to help them poor folk, if it hadn't happened so long ago." This showed an extraordinary change of heart for Boone, who had been absolutely down on Indians when they'd first known him. Omri said, "If we sent them back now, it would be all still going on. If you wanted to help, maybe we could send you back to their time. If Little Bear just held on to you, you'd all go back together." Boone, who had his face buried in his red bandana, froze for a moment. His eyes slowly appeared above the red spotted cloth. "Me?" he said in a quavering voice. "Well, you said you'd like to help. You've got a gun, after all. And you don't like Frenchmen. Maybe you'd like to shoot a few of them." "Before they shoot me," finished Boone. "That's a great idea. Thanks a lot. Things is tough and dangerous enough where I come from. I mean, when I come from, without going back 100 years to when things was 10 times worse. Come to that, what's stopping you from lending a hand to the Redskins if you're so crazy about 'em?" Patrick and Omri looked at each other, startled. "We can't go back," Patrick exclaimed. "How could we? We can't fit into the cupboard." Boone looked at them, looked consideringly at the small bathroom cabinet less than a foot high, and then back at the boys again. "That's true," he said grudgingly. "I reckon I can't argue about that. But there's still a way I can think of, if you could help 'em. And if you'd a mind to." "How?" they asked at once. "What's that down over yonder?" "It's so danged far away I can't see properly, but it looks to me like a whole bunch of folks laying in a heap in a box." The boys looked where he was pointing. Down on the floor was the biscuit tin full of Omri's collection of plastic figures. He'd gone up to the loft that morning to fetch it. Now he lifted it and put it on the chest, the top of which was now getting rather crowded. Lift me up and let me look," ordered the little man. Patrick put his hand down close to him. Boone heaved himself onto it as if he were scrambling up on a horse without a saddle. Patrick flew him over to the box. He lay down flat and peered over the side of Patrick's hand, hanging on to his precious hat. "Look at that! What you think you got down there? If'n it ain't all kinds of men with all kinds of shooting irons. If'n you could stick 'em all in that cupboard and bring 'em to life, and then send 'em back with the Indians, they'd come out the other end and send them Frenchies scooting back to France as fast as greased lightning." Omri and Patrick looked at each other. "Would it work?" breathed Patrick, his eyes alight. Omri could see that it was not just the possibility of helping the Indian that was getting him excited. From the very beginning, Patrick had wanted to experiment with the cupboard. Omri had barely been able to prevent him from stuffing dozens of soldiers in, bringing whole armies to life and making them fight. This looked like just the excuse he'd been wanting. The idea had a strong appeal for Omri too, but he was more cautious. "We have to think about it," he said. Patrick almost slammed his hand, with Boone on it, down against the chest. "You're always thinking," he said disgustedly. "Why don't we just try it?" Omri was frowning, trying to imagine. "Listen." He picked up a knight in chainmail, with a big helmet and shield, with a red cross on a white ground. "If we put this one in, for instance, he'd come to us from the time of Richard I. He wouldn't know a thing about Indians. He'd want to go off to Palestine and kill Saracens. He put the knife down and picked up a soldier in a flat cap and khaki shorts. "This one's a French Foreign Legionnaire. We couldn't even talk to him, let alone an Arab tribesman or a Russian Cossack. They were great fighters, but they wouldn't just agree to be in an army fighting Frenchmen in America on the side of the Indians. They're not toys. Every one of them's a person. I mean, if we brought them to life, we'd have to explain everything. Half of them wouldn't believe it. Others might think they'd gone crazy." But Patrick interrupted in high impatience. "Oh, what are you on about? Who's talking about soldiers with swords and axes and old-fashioned pop-guns? What about these?" He dug his hands into the tin and came up with a fistful of British soldiers. Some had self-loading rifles. Others had submachine guns. There was a howitzer, a 35mm anti-tank gun, 3 rocket launchers, and a variety of grenades. Omri stared at the firepower bristling out between Patrick's fingers. They had an army there, all right. Patrick was already moving toward the cupboard, the handful of soldiers ready to thrust in. "No," said Omri, as he had once before. "Stop. I'm going to do it," said Patrick. At that moment they heard footsteps coming up the stairs. As one, they turned and sat on the very edge of the chest, facing the door, forming a human screen. Omri's mother put her head in. "Patrick, your mother just rang. Your cousin Tamsin has had a nasty fall off a bicycle, and your mother's going to stay and help your aunt. So you won't be going home today." Patrick's face lit up. "Great! That means I can stay the night here." "I'm sorry about your poor cousin."